I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Professor Phil Piper. Phil's a lecturer in the School of Archaeology and Anthropology here at ANU. He's an archaeologist and has done extensive work in Europe and Southeast Asia. He's also a
zooarchaeologist.
How do you say it? Zooarchaeologist. Zooarchaeologist. So it's an expert in animal bones that are found in archaeological contexts, not just identifying them, but figuring out how they got there and what it means for evolution. So that might seem a strange way to segue into early hominins, but Phil was appointed as to the Archaeological Sciences Centre, is it?
Archaeological Studies Program.
Studies Program.
Yeah.
The University of the Philippines, and lots of interesting things happened there. So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Deb. Thank you all for coming this evening. It's a very cold, wet evening. Well, no, it's not wet, cold and windy. Today, what I'm going to talk about is what Deb invited me to come talk to about is something, a project that was on for several years. As Deb said, when I went to the University of the Philippines, the Homo luzonensis, the unique species of hominin, Callao Cave, north of Luzon. I'm not a paleoanthropologist. I am going to cover some of the morphological features, the natural history of Homo luzonensis. But the way I've organised this presentation, I'm also going to discuss the archaeological context of the hominin remains, because the hominin remains were not isolated finds. They were actually discovered with a whole lot of animal bone as well. I also want to give a little bit of a background to the archaeological stratigraphy, where the materials were found, the dating, to put it all into a bit of context. So the way I've structured the lecture today is I'll give a bit of background to the project itself and those participating in the project, discuss the archaeological excavations at Callao Cave, put it into context, a little bit on the stratigraphy, Callao Cave, earliest human remains in the Philippines, to provide some background, temporal background, discuss Homo luzonensis, or fossils of Homo luzonensis that have been discovered. We'll discuss, did Homo luzonensis use tools, dating of Callao Cave, and then my topic and why I was brought into the Callao Cave project in the first place, the animal bones that were discovered along with the hominin fossils. Then we'll take a little step off and move over to significance of the Middle Pleistocene of Callao Valley, which is very close to Callao Cave, as we'll find out shortly. There is a real relevance to understanding the Callao Valley, the Middle Pleistocene, to understanding the natural history of Homo luzonensis. Very brief talk about hominins on islands in Wallacea, and then I've just got a few comments to finish up at the end. So before I start discussing Callao Cave overall, some very important people, most important of all is Professor Armand Miyares, who was project lead at the School of Archaeology and the University of the Philippines. Mandy was the person that invited me to participate in this project, and I thank him very much for doing that. And he was my mentor when I was at the University of the Philippines. And Mandy kindly dropped the animal bone assemblages from his 2007 excavations at Callao when I arrived at the University of the Philippines. It was the first animal bone assemblage I looked at as a member of faculty for what was then the Archaeological Studies Program. Dr. Florent Dutoit was the paleoanthropologist that Mandy brought in to study the hominin fossils. And Rainer Brunn, now retired, was at the Australian National University at the time, at RSCS. He did the chronometric dating, the U-series dating, and he then moved to Griffith, has now retired. So if those names come up, those are the people that were involved. One other that I should mention as well is Clement Zanoli, who I'll bring up as we go through. He then came in a little bit later and looked at the dental material in more detail. So where are we talking about? Well, Australia down the bottom of here, Southeast Asia, I'm sure you all know, mainland island Southeast Asia, and the Philippines. And here, this is the Philippine archipelago altogether. This is Luzon Island. Got Callao Cave at the top there. And then you can see how close it is to the Callao Valley, which has got the major Middle Pleistocene deposits in it. And I've also marked on here on Palawan Island, Callao Cave, because we'll briefly touch on Callao Cave as well as we go through this talk. If you excuse me if I keep on stopping and drinking water, I don't want to lose my voice. So Callao is on the edge of the Pennybank and limestone karst system. A little white arrow up there. Here's Callao. The accommodation is all on the other side of the river, and you have to cross the river in the morning, and then go up the stairway, and you can go up and get into Callao Cave. This is the view out from Callao Cave across the river. It's really beautiful, across the plains, and now down across the Callao. And then this is in one of the antechambers. They've actually turned it into a church on the inside. And the Callao Cave fossils are on the outside here in the antechamber. So, archaeological excavation of Callao Cave. Callao itself consists of 7 chambers in total. Archaeology is the antechamber, close to the south entrance, down here. This is the antechamber here, this is the south entrance, out through here. All the squares there are all the excavated squares. The first initial excavations were in 1979 through to 1982, and these were by the National Museum, and they targeted the west side here, over here, and of the antechamber. If you're wondering why all the squares here have all got these different numbers, this is because my understanding is the National Museum split it all up into these, I think, 2 metre squares, and these are the blocks that they actually decided to excavate from that system they set up. And then these squares here, these ones with the low numbers here, these are all the ones that Mandy and the team more recently have excavated. Mandy excavated first against the east wall in 2003, over here. These are Mandy's excavation I've pointed out. As part of his PhD research, under the supervision of Peter Bellwood here. And Mandy at that time was interested in the Neolithic transition. So he was studying Callao as a number of caves that he was looking at in the Pennybank region. And he was excavating some of the earlier Neolithic deposits, Callao being one of the sites that he excavated as part of that project. So Mandy, when he excavated first of all in 2003, he reached a depth of 1.4 metres. Much of the material that he actually excavated out, as I'll point out in a bit, is Neolithic or later, but at 1.4 metres, he excavated through a thin deposit, with ash and stone tools, which produced a date of around 30,000 years ago. And then below that, there was nothing. So Mandy stopped. So it was sterile clay. or so he thought at that time. So what Mandy then did, he came back here to the Australian National University, where he was doing his PhD research, and he finished his PhD, and he published results in Bar International Series, 2007, unearthing prehistory. And then returned to the Philippines and moved the museum to the Archaeological Studies program. So between 2003 and 2007, Mike Morwood and the team from Indonesia, of course, were excavating in Liangguan, and they discovered Homo floresiensis. And during this time, Mandy also had a chance to meet with Mike and discuss his excavations with Mike up at Callao. And Mike encouraged him to actually go deeper. Have you reached limestone? No, go deeper. So Mandy took that advice, inspired by Mike, and so he went back and excavated deeper. So as I say, Mike's philosophy was don't stop until you hit solid rock and then dig some more to be sure. So here's Callao Cave, here's the young boy here. I went down over 13 metres, I believe, like, my God. Mine shaft, incredible. And here's Callao Cave under excavation. Mandy only had to go down about 3 metres or so. So, the 2007 excavations, and he reopened the pits that he'd excavated before and extended them slightly. And so, he went down through layer 4 at the top there, which is the Neolithic layers, dating to 3,500 to 4,000 years ago. And then layer 8 is a layer I discussed earlier, which contained some charcoal, stone artifacts, which is just under 30,000 years old. My charcoal date there. And then all the layers underneath that, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, were all almost entirely sterile. And then layer 14, only identified in the southwest corner, the deposits here. There's layer 14 down there. That's where they started to find animal bone. As I say, the layer 14 was down in the southwest corner. This red line here indicates the drop-off from the limestone here. You can see the upstanding, this is upstanding limestone here. It actually drops off in this direction here, and the deposits are actually deeper in this far corner down here against the west wall than they are over here, the east wall, sorry, than they are over here. And that's where these deposits have actually survived down in the down at depth. So layer 14 turned out to be a brecciated deposit. There it is on the right hand side there. Large lumps of silty sand, poor silting, characteristic of water transport. Lots of precipitates of manganese oxides and iron. So this is precipitates out of water, and it precipitates out of bone surfaces like limestone does. It's sort of a purpley black colour, and it's a good key indicator that bones have been in deposits that have been waterlogged and then dried out in the waterlog, because as it dries out, it precipitates out of the surfaces. Sediments were cemented with calcium carbonate, and as I say, the animal bones here have got a bad case of breccia. So you can see the bones here are actually coated really badly in the breccia, and you can see here this is this hard breccia here. We have to excavate through. So as I said earlier, I arrived at the Archaeological Studies program in 2007. A man gave me a whole load of bones that he dug up from Callao Cave. So Phil, can you study these animal bones? He said to me, well, I think there might be something interesting in there. There might be a human bone in there as well. And I sorted through the animal bones, worked on them, and sure enough, there was this bone fragmented into 2 pieces. I knew it was human. It was the only one that I found in the assemblage. The issue was that when I tried to match it up with not being a paleoanthropologist or a human archaeologist, I tried to match it up with modern human bones, and it just wouldn't work. I just couldn't get it to fit properly. It just didn't work. So anyway, we called it a paleoanthropologist anyway. So, and the first report I wrote for Mandy, reports on this bone, and I stayed there, like it's human, but what bone it is, I'm not entirely sure. Apart from it was metatarsal, wouldn't be that much. So, we discovered this brecciated material, this human hominin bone, a lot of animal bone as well. So I phoned up Andy and said, oh my goodness, like your layer 14's got this animal bone and this human bone in it. Very excited. We knew it had to be old because it was well below the 30,000 date that Mandy had already got for the deposit, but we didn't know how old it was. So we were thinking, well, will this actually turn out to be the oldest, hominin human bone that's actually been recovered from the Philippines? The earliest human bones that have been recovered from the Philippines up to that point were from Callao Cave. This is where the story of Callao Cave comes in. So Callao Cave is down near Callao. And it was initially excavated by Robert Fox at the National Museum in 1962 through to 1966. So it produced lithic assemblages, human bones, animal bones. Understanding what Robert Fox actually did has been a bit of a challenge. But Fox had a sequence of deposits, sequence of stone tools, and he provisionally dated that the earliest fossil or the earliest remains at Callao Cave to about 50,000 years ago. So French team, including Florent, went back to Tabon with Luzon and team from the National Museum. They discovered some more human remains, which they used conventional U-series dating techniques to date. And they came back with the earliest date they got was around 47 plus 11 minus 10. So I mean, there's huge error margins on that date. You know, if you look at it at face value, it basically sort of fits rather nicely with Robert Fox's estimation of about 50,000 years ago. So the question was for us was the bones from Callao Cave actually older than the material from Callao Cave? So we managed bit the bullet and sent 2 deer molars off and then the human fossil for dating. And we got the metatarsal came back with direct U-series date 66.7 plus or minus 1,000. The 2 U-series dates on the deer molars came back at 52.1 and 54.5 thousand years ago. Now keep in mind, I'm not going to go into detail about this now, but keep in mind that U-series dates are a minimum age anyway. So these are the minimum age for these fossils that we sent off for dating from layer 14 at Callao Cave. So this then got published in the Journal of Human Evolution. Florent at this time had actually, this is the oldest human bone. Florent had looked at the metatarsal himself, and he'd done, paleoanthropologist did all the biometrics and measurements, and Florent talking to him, he was convinced that it wasn't anatomically wasn't human. But when you put all the data together, it actually sat right on the very margins of anatomically modern human. So Florent was unwilling to commit to the fact that this one bone might be a new hominin species. And I'm inclined to agree with him. I don't think there was enough data for that, and so it got published as a human presence. And in this paper we state we're not 100% sure, but it could be anatomically modern. So we didn't give it a species designation at that time. We needed more evidence. So, Mandy, in 2009, went back to Callao again, and he excavated squares 3 and 4 here. Only layer 3 went down deep enough to actually get into layer 14. But he identified no human fossils in there at all. There's a few animal bones, not even many of them. In 2011, he extended squares 1 and 2, excavated square 5 here, and 1A. And 11 hominin fossils were recovered. That's included the most of the maxillary post-canine dentition. Then in 2015, he excavated squares 6 and 7, and they found 1 more fossil in there. So, Homo luzonensis. So here's the fossils, the fossils. So currently the 13 fossils in total, and they all come from the brecciated deposit in layer 14. There's 2 right maxillary M3s, and there's a sub-adult femur, so it indicates that there's at least 3 individuals represented in this assemblage. Even though there's only 13 elements, there's 3 individuals. 5 teeth from the post-canine maxillary tooth row, P3, P4, and M1 through M3, are all from the same individual. They're all found in the same square. They'd actually divided up, so separated slightly, but they're all in fairly close proximity to each other. Now the dentition itself, this is where I'm stepping onto fringes of my knowledge, derived features such as simplified occlusal surface, a reduction in size from the M1 to the M3. This is just the P3 to the M2, this illustrated here. But they also have many archaic features, like the premolars themselves are large compared to the molars, only seen in Archaeological. And they're also mesiodistally compressed premolars, and the crowns are asymmetric. So apparently it's also an archaic trait. And at this time, also suggested that some morphological similarities to Homo erectus. We'll come back to that in a bit. Another interesting feature is that P3 is 3-rooted and the P4 2-rooted, which is typical of Australopithecus and early Homo. So if this will work, earlier. Three-dimensional illustration. So you've got the 3-rooted here, P3. The right proximal pedal phalanx, CCH4, is also rather interesting. So it's got morphological features completely unlike modern humans and falls within Australopithecus. So this is principal components analysis that was published. This is anatomically modern humans here. This is the Lianboa as well. You can see they don't fall within the modern humans either. This is Australopithecus and this is CCH4 here. So it's way outside anatomically modern humans. And you can see here, this is Australopithecus, this is Homo luzonensis, and this is the same element in Homo sapiens here. So the question was, is Homo luzonensis an habitual climber as proposed for Australopithecus? And is this a plesiomorphic trait? Is that an archaic trait that's been retained? Or is it something like an abatic trait, a trait that's re-emerged in Homo luzonensis, isolated on Luzon Island? I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but it's an interesting question. Another question that's always been posed is how big was Homo luzonensis? Well, we don't actually have any skeletal elements that allow us to estimate how big Homo luzonensis was. All we can say really is that these are images or places that they're all similar size. And you can see that Homo luzonensis is considerably smaller than Homo erectus, also considerably smaller than Homo sapiens. So the dentition is also as small, if not smaller, than Homo floresiensis as well. Really. So what we can say is it was small. It was really small. But how small, or what its stature was, we don't really know. But it was pretty small. More recently, Callao, Florent, and Mandy and team reanalyzed the dentition. This is a specialization of Clement. He studied the dentition from lots of Hominins. And he argues that it has affinities with Homo erectus and Homo floresiensis. And it suggests that both Homo luzonensis and Homo floresiensis are derived from Homo erectus. And in many ways that makes sense. I mean, Homo erectus is the closest potential ancestor for both Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis, i.e. Homo erectus managed to cross the water gaps from Java and the Sunda Shelf and get out to Flores and Luzon Island. Well, that still doesn't explain some of the features that morphological features that Homo luzonensis and also to a certain extent Homo floresiensis actually demonstrate in terms of some of these really archaic features that they got, which as far as I'm aware is not evident in Homo erectus. So, we've got Homo luzonensis. Now the question then is, did Homo luzonensis use tools? Well, as I said before, my specialisation is animal bone and studying animal bone, and here we move a little bit more into grain that I'm more solid grains, well I feel I'm more solid grain. So this is one of the bones that we recovered from layer 14. And this is SEM images of the surface, and they were indicated with a little bit of circle there. And this is a really nice, clear cut mark. So V-shaped in profile. You can see it's got clear entry and exit points that don't follow the curvature of bone. They go across the bone and exit, and enter and exit across the bone. They've got what's called a shoulder effect, which is this effect here. This is very typical of a tool. As is the secondary parallel striations here. These striations are actually caused by impurities in the cutting edge of the tool that's actually been used on the bone. And the calcitic formations in the bottom of the cut here demonstrate that it's actually old. Right? So it's nothing modern. This is an old cut mark on the bone. We found 8 different bones, all with cut marks on them. And they were all directed, we directly dated all of them with U series. So we actually got ages, and I'll come back to this in a minute, minimum ages between 30,000 and 78,000 for the various bones that we actually dated that had clear evidence of cut marks on them. So, dating, Callao Cave, there's now been 13 uranium series dates, considered as minimum ages. And they vary from close to the entrance to the cave, 30 to 34,000 years ago. And the oldest one, CCH9, is 101,000 years old. So, what about the distribution? What does this actually mean? Well, all the animal bone were actually 3-dimensionally plotted from Callao, layer 14. This is the horizontal spatial distribution here, and this is the vertical distribution here. 130-year-old, this is an old image. This 130 Ka day was redated again by Rainer Grun, and that's what came out with the 101,000-year-old date, and this is the one that he published with Chris Rainer recently. So this is, Rainer and Chris, Rainer actually explains what the process was in that recent paper, process of redating that sample and getting a slightly younger date for it. What's interesting about the spatial distribution of the bones is that they're not random. The most, probably the most obvious distribution is this one here, running down through here. You can see that 130,000 date is up by itself over here as well. And you can see that many of the older dates are actually further into the cave, say, and some of the younger dates are closer to the entrance. What this almost certainly is is that this is as I'll explain in a little bit more detail shortly, is that these bones are accumulated within paleo channels, so run off into the cave, and that's how the bones are accumulated, and that's why you get these sort of patchy accumulations within the sequence. Another important feature that Mandy's considered is that Callao Cave, the southern entrance, or the so-called of the antechamber, here, there's this ledge opening here, there's a ledge here, and this appears to have collapsed. So this would have come across here, over here, and this entrance is fairly recent. Mandy thinks this probably collapsed in the early Holocene. And prior to that, this wasn't an open entrance that you could walk into. It was a high entrance here, and this was all blocked in here. So that's important. So there wasn't just sort of walk-in access that there is now. There was no actual access in that sense. It was actually blocked off with a hole higher. So the animal bones associated with Homo luzonensis, this is the distribution of the animal bones that throughout the entire sequence. So this is the total number of fragments here. So the animal bones at the top there are in the upper layers, the Neolithic and later layers. This small peak that we have here in Spitz 29 down to 39 here, this is this 30,000-year-old deposit that Mandy excavated in Trench 1. And this is all the layer 14 animal bone here. And you can see there's a concentration between Spitz 54 and 61. And Mandy excavated 5 centimetre Spitz. So you can see that there isn't any mixing between the animal bone. They're very isolated. Right? So the layer 14 is isolated from the other material, which is handy because it means that there's no evidence of any reworking in the sense of between the horizontal, the vertical distribution of the animal bones. So let's move on a little bit more about the animal bones associated with Homo luzonensis. As I said, the bones were all embedded in this hard brecciated deposit. There's a high concentration of small rounded pebbles within the brecciated deposits as well, which suggested that it was the base of a fluvial or flow channel. All the bone surface modifications and post-depositional processes of accumulation. You've got calcium carbonate precipitation, lots of bone erosion. This is caused by water action. This is either particulates passing over the bones or the bones rolling over hard surfaces, and it causes all this loss of morphology and rounding. And you also get this kind of weathering and cracking and manganese precipitate. These are all good examples of bones that have been within really wet conditions. And these in particular, this type of thing, they've been moved by water, by fluvial action. We see that as well in the hominin remains as well. You can see a couple of calcium carbonate as well. So if we take the spatial distribution into consideration and we take the surface modifications into consideration, it indicates secondary deposition. These bones are not in their original position at all. What has most likely happened is there's been movement of the fossil remains into the cave by fluvial action. So at some point in time, or times, there's been water flow from externally in through the cave entrance and down into the cave. And that's what's caused this distribution of animal bone and hominid remains into the cave itself. And I suspect, as you notice, I've not mentioned anything about tools. There's no stone, not a single stone tool. The animal bones clearly have got butchery marks on them. Those are definitely cut marks. One possible explanation, I only put this as a possible explanation, is lithic material was heavy. It didn't get moved from the external areas of the cave. the animal bones got washed into the cave, and that's how they survived in this brecciated deposit. That's just one possible interpretation, and I think the most likely one. And the surface boil weathering due to variability in moisture content and wetting and drying. So the bones will get wet and dried, and then the breccia is formed. And that's the reason they survive, is because of the formation of this breccia. So, some of the animal bones, what have we got? We've got clear evidence of butchery, at least partial hominin accumulation. Some cut mark as typical features of typical stone tools, but as I've just pointed out, we don't have any stone tools. So that's a bit of an anomaly, but that, as I pointed out, there is one possible explanation for that. So the hominin fossils recovered from within a relatively large animal bone assemblage. The bone surface modifications indicate movement and secondary deposition from fluid movement. And so that's the taphonomy in the bones, that's the movement of the bones, that's probably how the bones got into the cave itself and how they were actually preserved. So what are the animal bones that we actually find within the assemblage? Well, predominantly is Philippine brown deer, so Rusa mariana. But there's also some Philippine warty pigs in there. These are the endemic Philippine pigs, live on Luzon Island. And we've also got an extinct bovine, so Bubulus. Probably there's Bubulus minorensis, which is still extant, it's on Mindoro. This may well have been a relative that actually made it to Luzon. There's also remains in Cebu as well, Cebuensis, I believe it's called, which is also another type of endemic buffalo. So buffalo seem to have spread throughout the Philippine archipelago as well as pigs. So, there's more pig species in the Philippines than there is anywhere else in the world, with Philippensis being the one that inhabits Luzon Island. What's interesting, and I'll come back to this in a minute, there's absolutely no evidence of the Middle Pleistocene fauna. So the Middle Pleistocene fauna on Luzon Island in Cagayan Valley has stegodon, rhinoceros, giant tortoise. It's got Elaphus, several different species of proboscidean elephants. So it's got none of that is actually evident within Callao Cave and any of the deposits at all. So Homo luzonensis seems to have, shall we say, outlived the Middle Pleistocene fauna, as we'll discuss in a minute. Other species of vertebrate that have been recovered is two small mammals. Two species recorded so far from layer 14. So an extinct species of batomies in that's a late Pleistocene lowland forest. Extant batomies only present in the central Cordillera and mountain forest over 1,350 meters, which would suggest in certain times on Callao Cave there was submontane forest there. Callao Cave is nowhere near 1,350 meters, so this means a reduction in the submontane or a lowering of the submontane forest at times. And then there's also the small Luzon forest mouse. This is a lowland species. Is identified close to Callao these days, and it feeds on invertebrates and seeds. But this is hardly surprising. It looks like Callao fossil assemblage is very much a palimpsest, and it's hardly surprising that we've got species that existed within different environments within that palimpsest, covering quite a large chronological range. So, vertebrate assemblage consists predominantly of deer, with lesser numbers of pigs and bovine. Potential for future identification of diverse small vertebrate fauna, which will provide new insights to broader extinction history in Luzon. I think Janine, the show is working with Larry Leaney from the Chicago Museum on that material these days. And as I say, there's no evidence of the megafauna recorded in Cagayan Valley. That's 700,000 years ago. So, significance of the Cagayan, other Middle Pleistocene Cagayan Valley. First excavated by Robert Fox in the 1970s. So here is Callao, and this is how close to Callao Valley is. So it's really quite close to the site. There's Kalinga here, the famous Cabowan or Cabowanian stone tools, as they were called. So Fox always claimed there was a possibility that there was an association between stone tools and megafauna, considered as evidence of hominin presence since the Middle Pleistocene. But this has always been contentious, and there's never been any clear evidence that the stone tools were actually linked to the fossils. And the argument was that the stone tools have been reworked into close association with a megafauna on the site. Then Toma Ingeko, the team from the National Museum of the Philippines, and Gert Vandenberg in the first years, went back to Cagayan Valley and excavated some new fossil remains out of there. They found what's called Celebrocoris. This is this really archaic pig. They found some remains of this. This is the one actually from Indonesia, not from Sulawesi, not from the Cagayan Valley, but it's there to give you an example of what this type of people of Syrian would have actually done. They actually found a number of stone tools. But what was most exciting is they actually found a butchered rhinoceros, which they dated 700,000 years ago. And here's some of the evidence that they produced from this rhinoceros. It's got impact scars, got cut marks on ribs, etc. So this provided clear evidence that there was a hominin species present in in Luzon at 700,000 years ago. So this provided then the time depth that was necessary to, for the arguments for Homo luzonensis as well. We clearly know that there's a hominin 700,000 years ago. We don't know what that hominin looked like. There's no hominin fossils, but a clear evidence that hominin was represented 700,000 years ago. So again, it provides that evolutionary time depth, similar to the time depth they now got on Flores as well. I mean, they've got evidence for Homo floresiensis going back a million years. So it was significant in that sense, as well as significant in its own right. So, as a kind of finish up here, I just wanted to touch on some hominids on islands. So some animals have good dispersal ability. And it's interesting, throughout Wallacea, we find, in many places, you find the same sort of species. So, proboscideans, elephants, stegodons are really good at crossing watercrafts. You find them on Luzon or in the Philippine archipelago, they're in Sulawesi, they're on Flores, they're on Timor. You actually find giant rats, lots of giant rats in the Philippines. They've got huge rat diversity. There's lots of giant rats and endemic rat species in Sulawesi. Timor's got heaps of extinct rat species, and so has Flores. Tortoises, giant tortoises. You get giant tortoises in Timor, in Flores, and Sulawesi, and on Luzon Island as well. Luzon is interesting in that, I certainly guess Sulawesi to a certain extent as well, these big archipelagos, because you also get buffalo, which are deer, pigs, which are not always well represented on small islands. And then you've got rhinoceros as well, which seems to be unique to Luzon Island at the moment. Another good colonizer seems to be hominids. We've got hominids at 700,000 years ago in northern Luzon. We've got hominids on Flores Island at least 1 million years ago. There's evidence of hominids at least 200,000 years ago in Sulawesi, and I think it's only a matter of time now before a hominid species is actually found on Sulawesi. And where you don't find hominids is actually on Timor. So it's possible that Timor was just never reached that far. And evolutionary adaptation results in endemism. So we've got Homo floresiensis on Flores, we've got Homo luzonensis on Luzon Island. As I said before, we've got more pig species in the Philippines than anywhere else in the world. You've got Sus barbus on Palawan, you've got Sus philippensis up in Luzon, you've got Sus cebuensis in the Cebu, Panay region there as well. So they reach the islands, they've moved between the islands, and they've diversified. You've got one on Mindoro as well. It's an endemic pig species on Mindoro Island as well. 90% of Luzon's land mammals found nowhere else in the world. What's interesting also about the Philippine archipelago is that you've got a lot of these island groups, although at times with low sea level, some of the islands actually move together. Many of the island groups have stayed separate. So really, theoretically, there's no reason why, if a hominin couldn't reach Luzon, they couldn't also reach Mindoro. They couldn't reach where they could also reach Cebu and Panay. And there's no reason why they couldn't have been separated long enough to have actually speciated. So there is a possibility that Philippine archipelago could actually be really important in terms of hominin species diversification. So, to finish, Homo luzonensis demonstrates a variety of unique morphological features observed in no other hominin. Some archaic and others were derived. The most likely ancestor to Homo luzonensis is Homo erectus, but there are some of these archaic features as well, which are not explained by its relationship with Homo erectus, and this complicates natural history. Homo luzonensis the fossils weren't recovered in isolation, but they were recovered in association with a large animal bone assemblage, or relatively large. Bone surface modifications and sedimentology suggest redeposition and water action, and this seems to have been carrying on over a long period of time. The oldest fossils around over 101,000 years ago, so the youngest ones around 30,000 years ago. Dating also supports this whole idea of it being a palimpsest, with skeletal elements varying in age, as I've said, from 30 to 100,000. Cut marks on some of the bones suggest that it's a tool using hominin, at least. And research in the Callao Valley suggests hominins have been in the Philippines for at least 700,000 years, if not longer. And as I said, Philippines archipelago has potential to produce further evidence of hominins and be recognized perhaps as the center of hominin evolution. Thank you. Mandy, thank you very much. Everybody got a quick question before I lose my voice altogether? Maybe.
Oh,
Don't make it a pay you apology.